so here, Jerry Viking Performance Training with Jordan again, going over our Coaching the Big Three list series. This time's on deadlift. To rehash what I said previously in the squat video, so what we're looking at here is not necessarily a procession of learning your own deadlift or progressing on it, although it could be. This is more from the coaching style and the training perspective, is breaking it down into what are the main things we want to focus on when coaching others to deadlift without giving them too much detail to overwhelm them. And then as they progress, as they make the initial habits and create that baseline, then we start looking at some of the more advanced techniques, which we call the basic techniques, more of coaching 101. The more advanced techniques are coaching 491. And if it happens to have high level, like super high level picky techniques, we even would call that 601. So to start off, deadlift 101, the main things we want to look at first is simply approaching the bar, getting specific for the deadlift. Remember, for as basic as a deadlift is, pick heavy weight up, put heavy weight down, it's also one of the places that a lot of people can get sloppy on very easily. So approaching the bar is number one. We want to make sure that the feet are under the bar. Ideally, we'll tell them something like the end of their shoelaces. If you want to get a little bit more specific, say kind of the beginning of your toes or the part of your foot right before that. So make sure that the feet are actually, in fact, underneath the bar. The stance is ideally going to be fairly shoulder width on the deadlift. Usually it is going to, like some people want to go and deadlift at the same stance they squat at. If they have issues getting down to the deadlift, that can be a fine place to start. But generally want to teach it more of a straight up and down stance. We also have the toes pointed just more straight ahead rather than the slightly outward position of most squats. But again, these are the basics of that. Feet underneath the bar, the shoulder width, and then the toes being straight ahead. From here, want to have them actually just sit the butt back and then down enough to where they can grab the bar right outside of their knees. We want to make sure we have like this, at least this space, so she's not right in front of her knees, kind of pushing them inward or getting in the way, or even worse, above them. So I want to make sure that's out. Again, just have them simply sit back into it like she did. Make sure their back is straight early on. That sit down to reach position can be better than simply leaning over, because it also kind of automatically will put the athlete in a hip position to be able to reach the bar. We have that grip on both sides, back is straight. From there, have them brace, get just a good deep breath and press out, create pressure through abs, and just push away from the floor as they keep the bar close to themselves, keep the bar close the whole time, standing all the way. So push through the floor, through the feet, get a brace position. At the top, set it down pretty much just like you picked it up by reversing that position. Again, that is another place you'll see a lot of trainees screw up, is they'll do it great. Maybe even every rep they'll set it down okay, but the last rep they'll set it down like an asshole. Something like that. So don't be an asshole and return your deadlift the way it's supposed to be. Get that good eccentric motion. But from there, it's just that same thing. Getting it set up, building that brace, driving it straight up, keeping the bar close. One more simple position would be, go ahead, right here. So one more little at the beginning. I said drive through the floor. Have them ideally think about driving through the heels. The whole foot should actually be activated, but driving through the heels will create a more total body, and especially get the hamstrings and the butt involved, which that combined with keeping the bar close is where I want them to go. I said, so that is really all we're looking for, the basic coaching style of the deadlift. The straight back to decrease chance of injury there, bracing, and then the position to be in the right place. Now, as they have become good at the basic deadlift, we would go to some of the more advanced techniques, more of that deadlift 491. So here's some of the things that can actually change a little bit. So early on we're looking at, we want to be more specific. Ideally with this pull, you actually want the shins to be vertical, or at least as vertical as you can get. Again, we weren't that worried about it earlier, as long as they could get in that position. But now, when the deadlift is actually there, we're going to encourage them to actually kind of shift their body in a way to make sure their shins are more vertical. That may involve, according to the deadlifter themselves, moving their hips in position a little bit to create that, and getting the shoulders over the bar. We also want to make sure to get more tightness. We're going to actually have to tell the courage to start really activating their lats up here, and then taking their triceps and imagining driving the triceps into their lats to create all of this extra tightness in the upper back around the arms to be able to provide more force through the bar. From there, was have them go ahead and repeat the deadlift just as they were before, but as the bar gets past the knees, actually having, again, really focusing on driving the hips forward while driving the shoulders back. You might hear the term throwing the shoulders back. That can get the idea across, but if you don't mind doing it again, kind of like, again, without going sloppy, almost overemphasize that drive forward past the knees. So as the bar gets there, really driving that snapping back, make sure you don't overemphasize the shoulders back so much where they end up actually leaning backwards in an arch. What you want is still a final vertical position. One last piece of this more advanced part is as you're getting set up, encourage the athlete to really think about creating a wedge with their hips between the upper body and the floor. So she's here, she's getting tight, she really wants to get that hip in a place where as she drives through, like we were saying, you can go ahead, but she can really start driving the hips through the floor to really create that position where every single movement of the hips is creating movement of the upper body and of the floor itself. So to recap that one, the more like 491 level of the deadlift, it's shins more vertical, hip in a better wedge position, actually doing that like greater wedge job of really driving the hips forward and throwing the shoulders back through the movement, and then the tightening of the upper body by flaring the lats and really driving the triceps and pulling them into the lats. Now, like the really like advanced, pickier stuff, if you have somebody who's knocking all this out of the park, is really like ready for like little things that can make a big difference. One is going to be, this is going to sound crazy, I know, engaging the pinky, the actual pinky finger. So with the grip, this is like deadlift 691, just a couple little small details, is really gripping with that pinky first and squeezing that in. That creates this like external pressure all the way through the outside of the arm and up through the elbow, which will actually increase the grip force tremendously of your hand being closed. So going pinky first. And then another part of that, this is the one that's going to actually change, be an opposite of a basic thing, is while it's definitely not necessary, as a deadlifter becomes more advanced and as their ability to brace their abs becomes better, their back can actually bend. And that is, again, more okay as long as they're keeping it braced. So you'll see a lot of people's back bend around in a deadlift. It's not that it's necessarily wrong. Some very heavy deadlifts by certain body, you can rest. Like certain body types going very heavy, that back will practically have to round. And what actually is more important is that the body is braced through that position, and ideally not rounding more through the movement than staying straight itself. Again, that's something that we would never tell a deadlifter early on, because there's really no excuse outside of, say, like actual scoliosis or something like that for a lifter.